Good morning, everybody. This is Becky Carlin. I'll be your moderator for today's webinar. I have a couple of housekeeping items to cover before we get started. First, we'll be recording today's webinar, and it will be available beginning tomorrow morning on our website, livewellcolorado.org. To access the recording, simply visit about.livewellcolorado.org, visit the toolbox, and select Webinars in the toolbox menu. Second, we'll have some time for Q&A at the end of the webinar. If possible, please let us know who your question is directed to when you ask it. And to ask a question, simply type it into the Questions tab on your on-screen control panel. And we'll try to get through as many questions as possible, but if we can't get to your question, we'll make sure to follow up with you after the webinar. So now I'd like to turn things over to Lisa Walvord, VP of Policy for LiveWell Colorado.
Thank you very much, Becky. So we're excited today to be able to introduce to you what we're in an abbreviated talk calling our Rural Heal Guide. I'm going to go through an agenda and then we'll move on forward. So our agenda, I'm going to talk a little bit about LiveWell Colorado. Then I'm going to hand it over to Karen Ryan, who is our Director of Policy for LiveWell Colorado. Thrilled to have her on board. She's going to talk about healing the built environment. Then we're going to hand it over to Wendy Peters-Muschetti, who has been our contractor on this work, and she's going to talk about the rural context and the guide approach. And then as she gets into recommendations, we're fortunate to have 3 of our LiveWell coordinators on the call with us, Lisa Maldi from Chaffee County, Jody Towers from Montezuma, and Barb Parnell from Northwest Colorado. And they're going to be talking about how they're actually doing some of this work and really bringing it to life for you. And then we have somewhat of a call to action and wrap up with questions and answers. So as you have questions, please feel free to type them in as you go along, and we will get to as many of those as we can. It can take a little bit of time for them to get typed up and show up. So if you are thinking of questions, please do go ahead and put them in, and we'll answer them at the end. So for those of you who may not know LiveWell Colorado yet and why we are caring about this issue, LiveWell Colorado is a fairly new nonprofit organization. We've been around for almost 3 years now as a standalone nonprofit, but we have a long history through our partners and funders, the Colorado Health Foundation, Kaiser Permanente, and the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. We've been funding work in local communities to advance access to healthy eating and active living. And that was some of the work that predated us, and as that work was proceeding, really found that there was a need to do more in order to reduce and prevent obesity among Coloradans. So we were created specifically as a statewide organization to help guide that work and promote healthy eating and active living in the places we live, work, learn, and play. And today's focus really gets at some of those policy efforts in the places that we live, but we also live in places that we connect to for working, playing, and learning. So it really is a pretty comprehensive look. We did some work last year on the built environment broadly and thought that we'd kind of tell everybody then what would need to be done. And as we did that work, we found that geographic context really made a difference. The strategies that work in rural communities are very different than those that work in suburban and urban communities. So we have broken out and done this geographic perspective. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Karen, who's going to talk a little bit more about what the built environment is, and need to move the slide along.
Great. Okay.
Thank you, Karen.
So the built environment is a big term that means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, and it really is all of the buildings, spaces, places that are created or modified by people. And so we've used kind of a definition to make it kind of a consistent term for all of us, and just want to make sure that we're all on the same page before we jump into the rest of the findings of the guide. And so the first element of the built environment that we're looking at is the form and design of physical elements. So those are homes, schools, businesses, parks, trails, that physical infrastructure that makes up the built environment. But secondly, we're also looking at not only where the geographic location of those are and their existence, but then how those elements work together, where they're located. And then thirdly, what connectivity there is between those destinations. And all of those three factors work together to influence people's choices and their health. So for this report, we've broken the impacts of the built environment on health and obesity into three categories. The first is food access. For example, if you have more access to fast food versus a full-service grocery store, that can influence your decision-making and your health decisions. In regard to physical activity, do residents have easy access to parks or recreation facilities? And in regard to mobility, can they get to destinations within their community without a car? So using more of active transportation, bikes, and using pedestrian forms of transportation. And so that's the three categories that we've thought about in the terms for HEAL in the built environment for this report, and want everybody just to be thinking about it from the same framework. So why is the rural built environment different? Well, we've decided to focus on rural communities because they really do face different realities than urban and suburban communities. And urban and suburban communities have typically been the focus for municipal planning and a lot of those type of academic reviews of the built environment. And so some of the differences for rural communities is that they're often largely agricultural, and commercial can be spread out or only accessible by car. There's often a large lot residential, so density is an issue, and there's lots of land between residential areas. There also can often be a significant amount of state and federal land, which not only impacts connectivity, but can impact resources as well. It can impact things such as the tax base. So we've looked at and recognized the fact that Colorado is a state that really varies greatly due to geography, climate, topography, industry. From the plains to the western slope, we recognize that rural communities, that's not a definition that has one consistent term to it. And so we've looked at agricultural communities and see that those are very different, from the plains to the Front Range to the western slope. There are also developing communities that are small towns now but are evolving into suburban communities with a lot of growth expected. We also recognize that there are resort communities, and these attract visitors because of active living and people wanting to hike, bike, kayak. We also see that there are boom and bust small communities that maybe were economically prosperous at one time but have followed by an economic depression. And this has often been the result of natural resource extraction. And we recognize that, you know, these definitions may or may not encompass your community or all communities, but these are just a few examples of some of the communities that we worked with in the development of this plan. So why is obesity an issue in rural Colorado? Well, we've talked some about the varying land uses and challenges to HEAL, or healthy eating and active living. But what we haven't talked about yet is the correlation of those land uses with higher obesity rates. And that correlation is significant. Obesity is significantly higher based on a study, the study in 2009 by the CDPHE COPAN Obesity Report. Rural averages are 20 to 27% for obesity versus a state average of 19.1%. We also thought it was interesting to note that southeastern Colorado has some of the highest obesity rates. And these include communities such as Vaca, Bent, Huerfano, Kiowa, Las Animas, Broward counties. And interestingly enough, that's where a lot of our LiveWell communities are. So we recognize the challenges in those communities and are working to address them.
Hi, everybody. This is Wendy Peters-Muschetti. Good morning. I'm just going to talk a little bit about sort of the process that we went through to develop this guide and walk you through some of the local level community action strategies before passing it back to Lisa and Karen. So first, we just sort of wanted to highlight an area that we do talk about in the report. And we've called this slide Common Rural Challenges to sort of highlight some of the things that we heard over and over again from communities, Western Slope, Eastern Plains, all over the state. But you can also call this slide sort of common promoters or supporters, in that, you know, whether the existence of these, if you have them or not, tends to be an indicator if you have a challenge or something's working really well for you. So for example, you know, basic infrastructure. And oh, thank you, everybody.
Great. We're getting these messages from the system saying that our connection was. Thank you.
Thank you for bearing with us.
Yes. Oh, I feel so validated. I'm glad you can hear us. Anyway, this is Wendy. I'm going to keep talking a little bit about our approach. So how did we go about developing this guide? First of all, sort of in the development, we did a series of key informant interviews. In the end, we interviewed about almost 50 different individuals, and we really tried to be thoughtful in who we had conversations with, in terms of having geographical representation, different types of communities, different places of communities, different sizes of communities, and also different roles that people play. So from the town manager to a technical assistance provider, from the Department of Local Affairs, to a LiveWell community coordinator, and also to state agency staff. So diversity of roles. The other thing we did is to spare you all a lot of time and more pain, we did not want to do another survey of anyone. So what we did is we tried to get our hands on every existing survey or assessment that's sort of ever been done in rural communities and small towns in Colorado, and then just sort of did a thematic analysis across those different surveys and assessments to say what are some key themes we're hearing about, challenges, success factors, what are people doing to promote healthy eating and active living, and came up with a lot of really rich information. Obviously, we also did a pretty standard literature review, both of the state and nationally. There's obviously a lot of other people, looking at health issues in rural communities, and got our hands on every report we could find. And then the last thing is throughout this process, we just, as much as possible, reviewed, vetted, refined, the recommendations that emerged. We gave, everyone that we interviewed, we went back to them and said, are we hearing you correctly? This is what we're seeing as key trends. We convened several sort of groups of advisors to go through our emerging recommendations, constantly just to sort of say, are we on the right path? Do we hear you correctly? So what you're going to see now that I'm going to start showing you is sort of what we came up with, is that we have sort of 3 different levels of recommendations. And the first are those for the local action strategy, so those at the community level. We also created, separated out some recommendations that we think are much more targeted for state partners. So recommendations that absolutely are consistent in parallel local level action strategies, but are more at the level of the kind of recommendations like developing guides and case studies and toolboxes and things that could benefit any community anywhere. So it seems to kind of make more sense to sort of tackle at the state level for everybody. And the last, what we call overarching strategies, which are even a little bit more higher level, which kind of get at those issues of every time we did an interview, we asked the question like, what's that big sort of lever we need to pull to really change the system, to change our culture and our norms, and really create an environment where promoting healthy eating, active living is the norm, and it's the easy thing to do. And those are some pretty big ideas and really rich conversations. So we cataloged all those into what we called overarching strategies. So I'm going to dive right into local community strategies first. Oh, and just so you know as well, you'll see this in the format of the guide. So for each community level recommendation, what we essentially wanted to do is make each recommendation sort of stand alone if you wanted it to. And the reason why we did that is because it's probably fairly obvious that not all of the recommendations in here are going to be relevant to every community, and that we would love everyone to read all of them and be grounded in elements of approach, but some are just going to speak to you, the community, or be a lot more relevant. So we wanted to give you sort of standalone recommendations that you could act on. So how we presented them is that we have, each recommendation starts off with a pretty thorough background and overview, rationale, why are we even talking about this concept? And then it moves into very specific action steps that communities could take, and then each one is followed up with sort of a general list of who might be key partners, just very typical, like what kind of funders, university partners, CSU, typical partners that you may want for this kind of recommendation. And then we also provide specific examples of if there are folks in Colorado already working on this, we provide that. We've also linked case studies to every recommendation, and we end also with just much broader resources. So if there's literature, research, toolboxes that even exist nationally, we've listed those as well. So it's kind of a nice little tight package of a recommendation. So our first, Karen already sort of oriented you all to the 3 bucket categories of our recommendations. And just as a reminder, what I'm going to walk through are all categories under healthy food access. So do we in our community, do we all have the access to, eat good, healthy food at the center of our plates every day that we need it? How do you get there? Activity, as Karen explained, do we have opportunities for recreation and exercise? And then lastly, mobility, which is really more about engineering movement, back into our daily lives. Can we get where to go from point A to point B on a daily basis using our own body to get there if we need to? Those are our big buckets. So these 3 strategies on the page are the 3 broad strategies that we identified, that we heard from Colorado to promote healthy food access. We've also tried to get 3 fairly different strategies to sort of present a real systems view. That food access is about being able to produce and provide the healthy food, to process and make that healthy food, and ultimately to buy it, sell it and buy it and consume it. First one is about identifying, preserving, promoting land for human food production. And some examples of some actually partnerships with local, state, and even national conservation advocacy groups. And really, how do we work with those partners to not just preserve and conserve land for agriculture, but really put a high priority for preserving this land for agriculture for local human food production into such efforts. Another example would be working with funders to pilot and learn from more funding opportunities for land acquisition and physical infrastructure and capital improvements that aren't always, you know, the current highest priority in funding. So how can we encourage a little bit more of that and pilot it and learn from it? So the second healthy food access strategy is the make every kitchen a community kitchen. And this is one that probably a lot of you are familiar with. It's been a very hot topic in Colorado lately in terms of how can we build stronger local infrastructure to actually add value and process and move the foods that we may even grow locally. So some of the action strategies we've included here are starting with where you're at. And this is a really common theme in the guide, is inventory your existing facilities. What is already in your community that maybe has a licensed kitchen already that isn't used all the time? Senior centers, granges, restaurants, churches, nursing homes, community colleges, boys and girls clubs, etc. And really trying to understand, okay, what are the opportunities, when are they available or not, and then moving into developing policies that really model joint use agreements with some of these community facilities that may open them up to more local community or smaller scale producers or folks that are interested in processing some of their own food in a licensed facility. So the third healthy food access recommendation around promoting healthy food retail, also a lot of talk around how to do this in Colorado recently, which is very exciting. And some of the ideas we have here sort of start from the inside out. And I mean, starting by looking at within institutions and how they do purchasing and procurement. So can you start by even looking at who is common vending companies that serves your community and in your institutions? Can you look at how your schools and your hospitals and your workplaces and your government institutions do procurement and do purchasing? Are there opportunities for more region, cooperative purchasing and healthy purchasing policies? And then obviously looking beyond that into, working with some of your smaller and convenience stores to highlight fresh fruits and vegetables. And then lastly, we have some ideas around really looking at where you have key centers of activity and promoting healthy food retail there. For example, if you want to do community-supported agriculture and a CSA drop, can you have a school CSA that really partners with your school district and for possibly some of their produce? And can you, look at boys and girls clubs, churches, parks, wherever key centers of activity, and have, even if it's a produce stand and not a full-on farmers markets or a mobile vending or something like that, that's a doable scale. So that's it for healthy food access. There's a lot more in the guide. That's not it, I shouldn't say. And to illustrate some of these concepts and give you a lot more detail, Lisa Maldi with LiveWell Chaffee County is going to talk about how they've been promoting healthy food access through a really rich partnership with their school district. So Lisa, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Lisa Maldi, Director of LiveWell Chaffee County. We are located in Vista, and we have about 16,000 residents currently. And since we're 2.5 hours to city food system, so one of our key strategies is to increase the amount of fruits and vegetables served in the schools through farm-to-school and garden cafeteria programs. Because we only have one farm that grows food in Chaffee County, our local goal, our primary goal is to work with the Salida and Buena Vista school districts to establish indoor and outdoor growing areas so we can integrate fresh, locally grown food into the school programs. And finally, we have also worked with school staff to ensure growing facilities are used to educate students and staff on gardening, food production, as well as nutrition. And on the next slide, the Hoop House slide, I'll just start talking about that program. In March of last year, 25 teachers, parents, and children helped construct the hoop house at Avery Parsons Elementary in Buena Vista. And we also built raised beds, allowing each grade to have their own planting area. The food service director worked with the school principal to determine what should be planted, and in its first year, we were able to grow 166.5 pounds of produce that were integrated into the school meal program, which was actually pretty successful considering we hadn't anticipated getting anything into the ground soon enough. Staff are really excited about how this year went, and they're already applying for grants so they can expand their production. And one of the key improvements that came out of installing the hoop house was staff's willingness to the school food program. So since installing the house, food service staff has removed chocolate milk from the menu, decreased fast food fare such as hot dogs, hamburgers, and pizza on the menu by 50%, and also increased the amount of whole grains served by 14%. And although the program changes, they're directly a result of educating staff and working with them on the hoop house project. And so one of the next projects that we will be breaking ground on this next year that you'll see on the next slide is the Garden and Cafeteria project with the school district, which is a partnership with LiveWell Chaffee County, Guidestone, and the Salida School District. So this is a picture of the site that the school district owns, and they own nearly 20 acres where the soccer field and a dog park and about 5 to 6 acres are currently unused. So in the spring of last year, we presented concepts to the school board to use 2 to 3 acres for food production for the school food program. The concept included indoor and outdoor growing, an orchard, a pumpkin patch, and space for a potential relocation of Sliding Garden. And the school board gave us permission to proceed, and we began working on with administration to create an MOU. And in fall of last year, we were able to hire a consultant to begin work on a site plan and an operations and maintenance plan project. That will give us a little bit more information on the nuts and bolts of what this project might look like and how it might operate and how, what kind of funding we might need to come up to ensure sustainability of the project. We anticipate that once the garden is built to capacity and the trees mature, that we could grow 60% of the produce for the school meal program. So the school district administration, food service staff, and our community partners are very excited to get this project off the ground. And we really feel it's an amazing opportunity for the school district to set an example for our community by showing them how growing their own food can lead to.
I'm going to keep plugging away here to give you a brief overview of our physical activity-related recommendations. So these are really two very similar recommendations, but to get the concept of really looking at what do we have as existing centers of activity for indoor recreation, knowing that that's something important in Colorado, given that we don't live in 70-degree weather all day, every day, all year long. So how do we create sustainable outdoor recreation facilities and really tie those two together? So the first one, similar to the community kitchens idea, is really understand what you have first and inventory all those spaces that may be available and yet untapped for indoor physical activity and have facilities. Again, places of worship, senior centers, institutions, schools, obviously, and then really working with them to explore how do you open up these at other hours and days of the week. And I should also mention that the community kitchens, we have provided in the guide for both of these references and examples of how you would approach these kind of joint use agreements from a policy perspective. We referenced some guidance from Colorado Department of Health, Public Health and Environment around how to approach some of these joint use agreements that covers issues, liability, food safety, issues like that, so that you can use, licensed facilities, monitored facilities, but to the benefit of a slightly broader population. The second one is that how then do you look at facilities and expand those out and look more out of doors, even for year-round facilities as well. So one about creating sustainable outdoor recreation opportunities really includes ideas, again, around joint use facilities, but also gets at the point of regional partnerships, specifically for some larger outdoor facilities. Sports and recreation facilities may really be best approached through regional MOUs, intergovernmental agreements on what exists or doesn't exist around those ordinances for parks, open space, and trail dedication. How can those be created or strengthened in your community? So, and to illustrate these, around promoting physical activity, Jody Powers with LiveWell Montezuma is going to talk about several projects they've been working on. So take it away, Jody.
Thanks, Wendy. Good morning, everybody. This is Jody Powers. I'm the director of LiveWell Montezuma. And LiveWell Montezuma is in the southwesternmost corner of the state. We are in the Four Corners, close to Mesa Verde. I was asked to speak today about how we use the existing facilities to enhance physical activity, especially in the outdoors. And the first slide is, you're just looking at our new, well, it's not really new, but nearly new recreation facility that Cortez has, which Cortez is really the largest city in, well, really the only city really in Montezuma County. So the next slide. If you, we're really fortunate here in Montezuma County and the city of Cortez because I think we had some very smart city planners and individuals who knew how to write grants and expand our hike and bike and our park system. And so if you look at like the picture Parque de Vida, have nearly 125 acres of developed parks just within the city. And the city and the together maintain 138 acres of natural areas of hiking and biking trails in and around the city, which actually turns out to be 13% of the boundaries of the city of Cortez, which I think is pretty remarkable and is really used a lot by our residents and from people all over the region. As I mentioned before, we are fortunate in the last 7 or 8 years, we were able to fund and build a state-of-the-art recreation center. If you want to go to the next slide, I'm sorry. And this is really a recreation facility that's used by so many different people throughout the region because there is nowhere else to go. Otherwise, we'd have to drive to Durango, which is 60 miles to the east of us over a mountain pass. So we're really fortunate to have that. If you go to the next slide. We have an indoor pool that has a resistance pool, an indoor walking trail, a basketball and racquetball court, fitness equipment, a climbing wall, exercise classes available to everybody. The next slide. One of the reasons that I think I was invited to speak today was because of the participation of LiveWell in the municipal pool renovation. A lot of our residents within Montezuma, even La Plata, where Durango is, and Dolores counties, we are the only outdoor public pool in the region. So people will drive as far as 60, 70 miles to come and use our pool. The facility needed new dressing rooms, more open space. It was old, and the council was considering whether they would just do away with it. They just didn't know whether it was worth it. So a lot of partners got her in 2009, and we all decided that the pool was really important. So the city of Cortez, Montezuma County, LiveWell Montezuma, and many other community organizations decided on the renovation. LiveWell Montezuma contributed $20,000 to this project. And actually, this should be my last slide.
It's coming.
Okay. The renovation was a really great success, and one of the things we contributed most to was something called a splash pad, and you can see that in the photo there. We feel that the splash pad and the renovation helped increase the 30% over 2010, which we're really, everybody's really with that. It's an outdoor complex and is now, we think, going to be state-of-the-art, and hopefully 2012 is going to see an even bigger increase in participation we think all these things have really contributed to more people being active in our community.
Thank you so much, Jody. This is Wendy again. I think it's incredible the resources you have there, and I know that my children would be at that splash head every day.
Well, they kind of have guns, like water guns and kinds of things. I mean, it's really for a lot of different ages, and I've even seen adults using it, so I think it's kind of cool.
I'd play with them, too. I'd be there.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for sharing, Jody. This is Wendy again. I'm going to sort of wrap up the local level recommendations about mobility. So to our mobility, obviously really related to each other, but really sort of get it, the trails, paths, and also sort of issues around biking and bikeability. And trails that support regional connections and mobility. It is not surprising that we heard a lot about a real strong desire for more trails, more paths, and tons of research shows that it actually does really encourage folks to get out and go for a walk when they have really nice, safe, accessible paths. But we also heard loud and clear that we don't want trails to nowhere, that there should be more trails and paths that really are also sort of built community infrastructure and help people get to where they need to go on a daily basis, and also offer them a really nice long place to go for a long walk or a long bike or a long run if they want to. So some concepts here are really around beginning by conducting a community connectivity assessment to understand sort of where are your primary areas of activity, what are the best opportunities to connect residents with key destinations, and what form of connectivity is really needed to accommodate your unique residents. Do you have a lot of residents that are older adults or that use of mobility devices? So those trails and paths may look different, but really understanding what would really encourage folks to get around where they need to go in a nice, safe, and attractive manner. We also have some concepts here about building trails from the inside out. And so some of the real classic examples are, say, take a hospital, for example, and really start inside and creating regional trails inside a facility. Are the stairs available, accessible, and attractive? And then when you get out onto the grounds, is there a path or a walking path around the hospital? And that path or trail also connected, even via signage or something simple, for longer regional trails somewhere else in your part of your town. So how do you sort of build these, visual inside-outside trails all throughout your community? So the second one, fun and functional biking, is we heard a lot about biking, in that biking is fun, it's great activity, but there's some pretty unique challenges in rural communities to be able to bike even safely to get where you need to go. Since been prioritized or often funded in terms of bike paths and bike lanes and major roads, but it's just maybe not part of the culture. And we've heard comments about how it's just, it's sort of our culture, and if someone sees me biking to work, they think that my car broke down or something bad happened. So then some of the strategy ideas have about how do you maybe, in a hopefully low-cost way, address some of those ideas and really provide more cues and norms that it is safe and okay and accessible to get where you need to go on your bike. And some things really, having bike lanes and bike paths and signage and bike racks as you can, and having maps at your transit stops if you have transit stops, and really trying to connect that visually. But also some other ideas in here are around even getting some bike detail into towns, and how do you work with your local businesses and economic development partners, and hey, this is something we want to promote, but we don't have a bike shop. We don't have a bike repair shop. We don't have someone that can teach our kids how to bike. How do we bring some of those resources in? And then lastly, one that is pretty important that comes back at state level as well is how do we get health advocates, walking and biking advocates, everybody on the boards of things like your regional, your transportation planning region, and that it's commission. And so you as local folks have a voice in regional commissions like that actually dictate priorities around transportation infrastructure and funding. So that is it for the local level strategies, and we're going to end the local level with a case study from Barb Parnell with LiveWell North on how they've done an incredible job of really building and integrating trails all throughout the community. So take it away, Barb.
Thank you, and good morning. I'm Parnell from LiveWell Northwest Colorado, and I'm the community coordinator there. And I just wanted to give you a little background on where this project took place. It took place in Oak Creek, Colorado, which is the northwestern part of the state. It's a community about 900 people with another 900 kind of outside of that community. And we have a non-paid mayor there. We have no town manager. Obviously, there's no grant writer. There's 1 mile of paved roads within the community of 5 miles of street roads. So when you look at the recommendations, some mobility recommendations, one of the things that's emphasized, and Wendy already mentioned, is you want to start with what you have. And this is that. We had advocates, young people move into the Oak Creek area because it's an affordable place to live in our community. And those parents were really wanting to improve for the community. So we had advocates. We also have the rural network, and for those of you that live in communities, you know that one of the benefits, certainly, of living in there is that you either know someone or know someone who knows someone that can really help you with whatever project it is that you want to work on. And it just so happened that we have in Oak Creek, Colorado, the Assistant Director of Rocky Mountain Youth Corps. So that was certainly a huge benefit. And then the third thing that we had is a trail. About approximately 10 years ago, the community developed a trail plan. And of course, there were some issues associated with this trail plan because when they developed the plan, they put some of the trails on private property, and some of the property owners were, of course, very concerned about that. But it's what we have. Then we decided we needed to really identify what it is that we needed. And so if you look at the community level action strategies that are on the mobility recommendations, you see that there are certain things that you want to kind of highlight. The first thing that we did was really that connectivity assessment. And that was easy for us to do because there were no trails in the community at all. And the picture you're seeing right now is actually an example of one of the trails from that field, the school field, up to the school. You can just hold on, just keep that. Go back to the first one if you want. The first one, yeah, perfect. So that is that was one of the hubs for activity, which is the connectivity. It says look for where are some of your hubs of activity, and so our school certainly is a hub of activity in the rural community. Our parks were, as well as our downtown area. So I would recommend take pictures of some of these places because, as you can see, it's a fairly unsafe walkway. We identified that we need community partners and advocates. So besides the ones that we already indicated, we looked to the town council, to the school district administration team, and of course Rocky Mountain Youth Corps. They were in at our back door. And then we updated the trail. We decided, we'll update this trail plan. As you can see that trail plan on that slide. We said, because of the community issues that were developed with the original trail plan developed 10 years ago, we want to really have a plan that's only on town-owned property. So we didn't want to do any kind of easement acquisitions and deal with any railroad issues. We also said that we could include local road connectors, and then we wanted to use the paths that the students and the community were already using. And then lastly, we identified that we need a funding. And so we started to look for, okay, who is it that's going to be involved in this project that can be an advocate and start looking for some funding, because as I indicated, we didn't have a grant writer in the community. And then once we identified who that person was, what are some of the local and sort of straight funding sources? You're fortunate to the state university graduate program trail plan for a cost of $1,000, and that was on that slide the original slide that you saw. They developed that trail plan for us, and it did include the town-owned properties, local road connectors, and also the paths that the locals use. Then we had a lot of community group meetings where we prioritized what are the trail projects that we wanted to have in the community. And this was based on cost and also usage. And then after we had this trail space, we started to seek funding sources. And what we found in Colorado here at the very end of the spring said that they were accepting applications for quick turnaround for shovel-ready trucks. Well, because we had the trail plan in place, we had the community advocates in place, we were able to quickly turn around that grant, and we did receive it. Then we started working on building the trail at a time, and as you saw in the previous, there are some pictures of our Rocky Mountain Youth Corps working on those trails. So the top slide is the actual trail that they made in that unsafe area that you saw before, and this is another trail that they started to work on. And so we did a partnership with them, and they were the ones that actually built these trails. And as you know, Rocky Mountain Corps can build trails for a very reasonable cost. So we started just taking one trail at a time. Let's just do this kind of piecemeal. And then if you look at the last slide, I think it's really important to celebrate your progress. And so this is an updated trail slide that shows you some of the ones that were completed, where connectors are, and then some of the trails that are left in that community to complete. And basically, it's just the red trails that we have left to complete. So the key I all of this is that community momentum, I believe, is really always with action. And so I would conclude with saying that you need to move some dirt.
Bravo. That's excellent. Thank you so much, Barb. We really appreciate that story and the sharing and all the different strategies that you have put in place to really make a reality. It does take some thoughtful coordination and a lot of partnerships, which you guys have done a fabulous job of. And we apologize for the bouncing back and forth between slides. It seemed like there were multiple to illustrate what you were talking about. Hope that wasn't too distracting to folks. We want to shift gears now, talk briefly about state-level recommendations. As Wendy mentioned at the beginning, one of the things that we did, we kind of wrestled with how we would present this content and how we would make this a usable guide. We recognize that there are different people and different interests in the work, and that what can be done by Barb and Jody at a local level is different than the work that some of our state agencies and our even federal agencies and what some of our nonprofit and foundation partners, including ourselves, can do. So we identified those that we thought were needed to help that local level, and we separated them into a section that we call the state level recommendations. And we categorized much of the three categories, so the food access, physical activity, and mobility. And in some cases, the recommendations really blend across specific recommendations that Wendy talked through. In other cases, they're unique. So on the food access is one where we really are able to look at them in retail. And I'm with community kitchens because we've already received a question on that, and how, it had to do with how do you address the environmental health and food safety regulation. And that's frankly one of the things that we think needs to be done at a state level. There are a lot of resources and rules and guidance out there, but it's not necessarily used, and it's spread out in different places. So one of the recommendations is really how the community can use public kitchens, and it does sound good. Every kitchen is nice, that mechanism that y'all share. Don't take that literally. We be thoughtful, and safety is an important part of that, and so some of the underlying kind of suggestions we have. So what we hope to do working with partners is find ways in which we can develop a how-to guide on how to use commercial kitchens. And we also have those policy and regulatory changes that are needed to allow, encourage, and incentivize additional food processing facilities to be made available. So again, we know that there's some spaces that already exist that we just need to the public policy issues in order to make them a viable option. Area of food production, I think Lisa talked on a number of things that are important, and one of the things we need to do is to aggregate some of the stories to identify some codes and regulations that are examples, and give stories about where the benefits of food production to local economies. So those are some of the kinds of things that we really see are meaningful beyond a community, and they will really be done best from a broader perspective. So that's why they go into that category of state level recommendations. And finally, within retail, a lot of that is again finding codes and aggregating some resources that might be able to best support rural and small town communities. And if you think about these, all these different kinds of recommendations, I'm going to hand it over to Karen in just a minute on the physical activity. But these are things that LiveWell Colorado is looking at specifically as kind of our coming years, and but not ours alone. In some cases, that we make sure that we promote that which some of our partners are doing, that we communicate to partners that these are things that have been highlighted. And we're sharing them with our LiveWell as other communities to get a sense of what is needed now. And so we can prioritize that way as well. So you'll start to see some of this activity. One piece of it is the HEAL library that we'll be talking about next week, and another webinar that is an aggregation of some of these codes that are being requested. So that activity is already happening, we're excited to say. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Karen.
So in physical activity, at a state level, we also saw a very common theme of limited resources, and recognize that on the ground in local communities that resources are the major challenge. These facilities for physical activity, parks, recreation facilities, trails, are not cheap to build, develop, or even operate and maintain. And so you can kind of see a theme within these recommendations that LiveWell Colorado partners need to continue to support these efforts through tools and strategies. And the guide is a great beginning. It provides those best practices and information sharing, but we need to continue to share those examples so that we can learn from each other within the communities of Colorado. And so some of those common themes of limited facilities and best practices include shared or joint use facilities. And one tool that we've highlighted and would like to, one of our primary partners is developing is the Colorado Department of Public Health and the Environment is developing guides and resources in regard to shared and joint use facilities. And so that's just one of the resources we've identified. We also know that from some of those best practices that regional facilities are another great way to maximize the use of resources and a broader audience. And so identifying case studies and best practices there. And then we maximize the use of these resources to maintain and develop facilities. So those are where we anticipate focusing on this and providing more information sharing in the future. In regard to mobility, one of the recommendations in this area level is to continue to promote and encourage the implementation of safe routes to school. This is one that we've taken to heart and actually are already in the midst of implementing. LiveWell Colorado is taking the lead as lead facilitator for Safe Routes to School State, and hoping to continue those efforts and put that information and resources down to the local level so that we can continue to extend those programs and infrastructure. The other recommendations is to continue to create culture change and promote commuting through education and culture support. We also want to ensure that transportation planning, this is something that Wendy mentioned earlier, really incorporates health advocates during the planning process, and so that we have that frame of mind that this really does impact individuals' choices and behavior, impacts obesity directly. We also want to work with our partners to provide additional case studies in regards to the economic impacts of HEAL, and are also working with our partner through the Colorado Department of Transportation on their bike and pedestrian plan. It's the first statewide plan that has been developed, and one of the small and rural communities' interests are represented in that plan. So these are just a few examples of statewide level recommendations that we're working on.
Great, thank you, Karen. In the interest of time, I'm going to fly through the next little bit and try to answer a couple of questions, and then we will commit to getting answers to the questions that have been submitted, and we will provide those back out when we send the link to the recording, hopefully tomorrow, but certainly by sometime next. And when we look at the overarching recommendations or overarching strategies, these are, as Wendy said, kind of really those central and really in some ways the most exciting things in the pandemic work that have to happen. And I even think they're both overarching and underlying, if you will. And you see a lot of these themes are consistent with some of what Karen was talking about, what some of speakers have shared about what's needed. A lot of it, that first one, I think we're already seeing some movement in terms of the appeal efforts across state governmental agencies. One of the questions that came up was that a lot of the issues and challenges causing exacerbating obesity in rural and urban communities is intertwined with sustainability. And so that's something we're very alert to. That's a perfect example there of how important that we really think about convergence, different partners maybe for different reasons why they care about it, but making sure that all those partners are at the table. And I think we're seeing that happening to an increasing extent. You see a lot of that work both through the area as well as some of the physical activities. So we couldn't agree more that that's important. Some of the other things, again, how do we increase in capacity? How do we make sure that we are really meet needs of rural communities and making sure that funders, whether there are foundations or they are federal agencies, understand unique challenges to being able to make the case for what their needs are. So we see, a lot of this stuff is about working together, understanding what the unique needs are and sharing those thoughts and really continuing to build the capacity around this work. So we'll be talking to our partners about these things. So there are themes that will continue to come up. None of it will be finished today or this year. It's ongoing, challenging work. Many of you know who've been very involved for a long time. So it is exciting to see just kind of the conversation process of developing this guide, some new relationships that we're. So we do encourage you to go out and look at this guide. It is not, we're not distributing printed versions of this. We really see it as they're bits and pieces that are useful for different folks. And in that interest of sustainability, we didn't want to just print a lot of paper, and we do see it as being useful to get to it online. So we do encourage you to share that with your partners and think about how you can use it, make use of the suggested resources, and let us know what resources you may have that can contribute more to this. If there are areas to get involved in, particularly with state recommendations or overarching recommendations, please let us know that as well. So I want all the incredible people who put so much time and energy into making this a reality. It's been going on for a long time. And it started off with some work that Jessica Osborne did for us last year. And really identified that there's so much more here, and we will just barely touch the surface. So thank you to Jessica, and then to two of our other key partners, Monica Bulik and Monica with Kaiser Permanente and the Colorado Health Foundation, Jim Iskar, who's been an incredible part of ours, bringing federal and Colorado-specific perspectives, Dr. Julie Marshall, and last but not least, Wendy Peters-Moschetti, who is our director, who really pulled a lot of other folks into it. So thank you to all the other foundations, the nonprofits, and many experts who were contributing to this work. There's a good list of it, of those contributors. We hope we didn't leave anybody out in the guide itself. So those are more great resources for you. Take a look at that as well for more folks who can help. So I'm quickly looking at one question that I can answer right away, and then we will, again, get to some of the other questions in writing for you. The question about is CDPHE's Guide to Sharing Facilities available now? It is not. It is in process, really working hard and very thoughtfully about that. And I'm sure that once available, because of the energy that's been put into it, it will be very well distributed in terms of how you can find it. And we'll be sure that we are promoting that with our partners. So with that, thank you so much for joining today's call. And again, do watch our follow-up email with questions and or answers to your questions, and feel free to share additional with us. Thanks, and have a great day.